N.W.A, the world's most dangerous group, emotionally died on April 23, 1991. That was the day that Dr. Dre, the group's main producer, invited Eazy-E, his groupmate and founder of the Cruise record company, Ruthless Records, to the Galaxy recording studio of Solar, an acronym for Sounds of Los Angeles Records. Solar was the domain of Dick Griffey, a concert promoter who had created the company in 1977 from the shares of another company he had co-owned with Soul Train founder Don Cornelius. From the late 70s to the mid-80s, Solar scored big with acts such as Shalimar, The Whispers, and Lakeside, standing out with its track record of hits that blurred the lines between disco, funk, R&B, and soul. But as a businessman, Griffey was aware of the changing tide. Rap was gaining momentum, destined to eclipse the genres he had been familiar with for decades. His interests were consequently drawn in that direction, and he eventually settled on a favorable prospective partner. Marion Suge Knight Jr., growing up in the same city of Compton as 4 of the 5 classic N.W.A. members, was determined to make something of himself, seeing his father struggle as a laundryman, housekeeper, and truck driver. He once remarked that his old man, for all his hard work, barely had enough money to buy himself an extra beer. Well, that was going to be him. He will buy an entire brewery if need be. And initially, that path was going to be professional football. He was a decent defensive end, first at El Camino College, then at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Although undrafted, Suge made it to the NFL via a contract with the San Francisco 49ers, who were already making their mark in history as the football team of the 80s with 2 Super Bowls so far. But a championship ring was not in the cards for Knight. He was dropped after an altercation that led to being charged with attempted murder and grand theft auto, another shot at the NFL as a replacement player for the Los Angeles Rams during the infamous 1987 player strike, quickly fizzled. So if football wasn't going to work out for Knight, perhaps a sort of enforcer would. He had the build for it, 6 feet 2 inches tall and over 300 pounds. He just needed to build a persona around it. He was already affiliated with the Piru Bloods of Compton, and he often wore red to make sure that was understood. And his soft-spoken nature belied his new career in security, working with clientele that included New Edition alumnus and R&B superstar Bobby Brown. It was a career that enabled him to cross paths with members of the Ruthless Records camp, such as the DOC, who, at the time, was under the legal drinking age and certainly needed help getting into clubs. Suge and the DOC especially got close after the latter suffered the devastating car crash that ended his promising rapping career. Suge set up autograph sessions, among other avenues, to generate money, while the DOC brooded over his desolate future, as well as his naivete as a doe-eyed southern kid from Dallas selling his publishing royalties to Eazy-E for mere jewelry. To rectify his dire financial situation, Suge, already the owner of his own artist management company, had suggested a joint venture, away from Ruthless Records. Funky Enough Records, named after one of the DOC's hit songs. But the DOC was uncertain about that move. And that was what made Suge think of roping in someone of greater influence to make this dream a reality. For a man who had, by the end of 1989, produced tracks on 5 gold and platinum certified albums, Dr. Dre, even with his palatial abode in Calabasas, felt undervalued, both in finances and stature. He thought of himself as a co-founder of Ruthless Records. After all, Dre was the first person that Eazy-E brought in as he formed his company in 1987. He was the one who brought in Ice Cube, the premier MC and songwriter of the camp. And yet, when Eazy hired Jerry Heller as N.W.A. and the company's manager in 1987, he felt relegated to the status of an employee, making only tens of thousands instead of the millions he should have been raking in. Although upset that Ice Cube left because he refused to let their partnership and friendship override financial concerns, he was beginning to understand why. But first, Dr. Dre was going to exhaust all avenues. To his credit, at least Jerry Heller, conflicts of interest notwithstanding, tried to do something. He attempted to negotiate a sub-label deal between Dre and Warner that would have brought in $2 million as an advance. But Warner's response? Nah, we don't need any problems with the FBI. Then there was Priority Records, Ruthless's distributor, stepping in with a $250,000 deal that consisted of a solo album and back payments. But it wasn't enough. Slowly but surely, Dre began to confide in that burly friend of the DOC's, who was now part of Ruthless's security detail and soon had him signed to his management company. Suge Knight, now with N.W.A.'s primary producer, as well as one of the group's songwriters, was slowly chipping away at the formidable gangster rap monument. And Knight's job was made easier by the fact that Eazy-E seemed unwilling to concede a scintilla of renegotiation with his franchise player. He had Dre on contract as a producer, rapper, and writer for Ruthless Records. Allegedly, Dre was contractually allowed to work as a producer for anyone. But by 1991, Dre, feeling trapped, simply wanted out of Ruthless entirely, even if it meant by any means necessary. The name Suge was derived from Sugar Bear, a nickname the senior Knight had bestowed upon his son because he thought he was a sweet kid. Well, Suge was no longer a sweet kid. Instead, he was now a cigar-chomping, red-color-clothed record label aspirant who was already building a reputation for thuggery in the music business. Legend has it that he had Vanilla Ice, the Ice Ice Baby hitmaker, dangling off a hotel balcony by his ankles to get him to sign over the royalties from the first rap song to be a #1 pop hit to Mario Johnson, one of Knight's clients who had allegedly written some of the song's material. Apparently, the truth is that Suge simply threatened to throw Ice off the balcony, and the issue was resolved in court. But the story burnished his legend, and when Suge examined Dre's contract with a few experts and deemed it extremely unfavorable, that was Dre's cue to rely on it. And so it was that on April 23, 1991, Eazy-E answered that page or call from Dre to show up at the Solar Studios that Dick Griffey had provided Suge for what was about to happen. All 5 feet 4 inches of him showed up without a bodyguard to be confronted by 2 or 3 big-shouldered guys with Louisville sluggers. And Suge himself, claiming that he had both Heller and Eazy-E's mom in a parked van outside the building. He didn't. Suge put down before Eazy documents with fax imprints of Sony, the conglomerate that owned Solar, and suggested that he sign the releases of 3 ruthless artists: Dr. Dre, the DOC, and Michelle, Dre's then-girlfriend, with a gold-selling R&B album and 3 top 40 hits of her own. Eazy-E did so, living to fight another day. Then Suge faxed the signed release forms to Sony, declaring that Dre was now available, and requested a little over $100,000 to be sent to Night Life Productions, the company that will come to be known as Death Row Records. It would take a lot more than signing documents under duress to release artists, and contrary to rap lore, it would take up to a year to make Dre's departure official. But the events of that April night were meant to drive the following point home. Dre wants out, and with him gone, N.W.A. is done. But of course, no one outside the aforementioned parties knew that. As far as the public was concerned, a second album was on the way, tentatively slated for November 1990. Only 3 months earlier, they had gobbled up 100 Miles and Runnin, a gold-certified EP that was the first of its kind in rap music history, and which had previewed the upcoming album in its last track. N.W.A. was arguably at the peak of their popularity, identifiable beyond the music with the black-colored sports team gear of the NFL's Los Angeles Raiders and the NHL's Los Angeles Kings to enforce their outlaw aura. And people really wanted to know how N.W.A. could continue the momentum of Straight Outta Compton, not to mention if they can survive the significant loss of a key member in Ice Cube, who had moved on to become a major rap star in his own right. Oh, as for rumors of an impending breakup? Well, let's see what Dre has to say about that.
A lot of rumors going around about the group breaking up and everything. That's not happening. 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 That's not happening.
And as I mentioned to you earlier in the broadcast, we at HBO Sports have covered Mike Tyson for the past 4 years, bringing you every one of his fights since before he won the heavyweight championship.
Once dubbed the baddest man on the planet, undisputed heavyweight champion, Iron Mike Tyson, had his aura of invincibility shattered forever when he lost by knockout to an underachieving, overweight, and 42-1 underdog by the name of James Buster Douglas on February 11, 1990. By December, on the comeback trail with his bout against Alex Stewart in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Tyson and his then manager, prominent boxing promoter Don King were unhappy with the media pummeling based on reports of violence, spousal abuse, mental instability, and a decline in vigorous and disciplined training that led to the biggest upset in boxing history. And the centerpiece of that dissatisfaction was HBO, the cable television network that had extensively covered Tyson and had aired most of his pro fights. So, to repair their relationship with their cash cow of boxing, HBO adopted a hands-off approach. They let in an independent voice in the person of Spike Lee, the premier black auteur of the time and who was still enjoying the acclaim of the groundbreaking film the previous year's Do the Right Thing. Lee was to produce a short pre-fight documentary on Tyson that could kick off a rehabilitation of his image. Unsurprisingly, Don King, ever outspoken and domineering, was featured prominently in this showcase, including a clip that had him speak on the supreme scrutiny people like him and his client faced every day of their lives. Tyson and King were both black Americans who had reached the pinnacle of their respective professions, and yet they felt that it wasn't enough to placate a white majority that, for the most part, still saw them as intellectually inferior and socially subservient, the descendants of African slaves who were genetically doomed to being a permanent underclass. They were seen as the exceptions to the rule and not much else. No list of accomplishments or amount of wealth or education could prevent them from being clobbered with the ultimate racial epithet, the ugliest word in the English language.
You're a nigga till you die. If you're a poor nigga, you're a poor nigga. If you're a rich nigga, you're a rich nigga. But you never stop being a nigga, and if you get to be educated, you're just an educated nigga.
This statement made its way onto the title track of N.W.A's second album, NIGGAZ4LIFE, spelled backwards in all capital letters and horizontally mirrored to avoid censorship, released on May 28, 1991. In the hands of N.W.A, nigger became nigga, a term transformed from an insult into a term of endearment and an action of empowerment among some black Americans, even if it retains the stench of its original meaning and purpose. Nigger, nigga. What difference does it make in American society, especially if you are a young black male, the personification of ultra-violence, hypersexuality, moral depravity, and financial destitution? The album cover is a depiction of a crime scene that includes the ghosts of the N.W.A members arising from shroud-covered corpses on the side of a street, with the requisite yellow tape, police cars, and law enforcement. Looking at the album cover, it doesn't look like these ghosts will get white robes and angel wings anytime soon, and it doesn't look like the police and detectives at the scene particularly care about the demise of the group members. Even in death, they are still niggas. So the question is, why worry about what white people, or anyone really, thinks about you?
Why you brothers and sisters using the word nigga? That's all I need, black race.
Whether it's being a dope dealer or searching desperately for a regular 9-to-5, whether it's being harassed by the police for suspected wrongdoing or for just being black, whether you're making money, legit or not, or broke, what difference does it make? Just make money and enjoy your life.
I don't give a about nothing except getting paid, getting bitches and issuing stitches.
And why even have a moral compass if attitudes toward you and your race doesn't change, regardless of how upstanding of a citizen you are? Eazy-E, a notorious womanizer, made sure he put in a few bars about what typically happens on tour between him and certain members of the fairer sex.
And if you think I'm your wife, your mother right, yo, cause I'm a nigga for life.
In other words, N.W.A was money cash hoes before Jay-Z rapped about money cash hoes. In 1988's Straight Outta Compton, at least there were glimmers of hope in the blighted Compton, California world of N.W.A, a slight assurance that things couldn't possibly get any worse. But by 1991, N.W.A had given a taste of what to expect from their second album. With Cube, their lyrical and socially aware overlord, gone, it felt like the group was reverting to shock rap caricatures. It wasn't like 1991 was shaping up to be uneventful. The Gulf War had occurred, and Rodney King had been severely beaten. But if N.W.A was barely social-political in the beginning, they are decidedly apolitical now. Rousing people to deplorable urban conditions was no longer of any concern to them. They only wanted to shock, to the extent that Dre felt the need to inject a curse word in his customary welcome.
The mother saga continues.
But to condemn Niggas4Life as being bereft of any substantial artistic merit is entirely inaccurate. Dr. Dre had made his first major leap of evolution on 100 Miles and Runnin, deepening his mixing and layering skills into a funky brew that made him the major pioneer of G-Funk. And on Niggas4Life, Dre not only improves such skills, but also tones down the amount of up-tempo cuts to intersperse with slower numbers. In addition, Dre had improved on his interpolation abilities, now incorporating session musicians more frequently than relying on straightforward sampling, which now began to feel like a relic of the 80s. The production wasn't the only thing that was improving. Dre was becoming more confident as a rapper, finding his pocket within a BPM range of around 90 to 100. Ditto to Eazy-E, who now sounds more solid and confident within the beats. That's what 4 years of coaching and rhyming get you. And MC Ren, already a remarkable MC, was beginning to peak, stepping into his role, despite his limited charisma, as the crew's most prominent wordsmith. The stage is set to present an album that thematically centers upon nihilism. N.W.A really pushed their limits here, with lyrics that are harsher, more outrageous, and peppered with more cursing. Conceptually divided into two halves, the first 9 tracks of Niggas4Life are dedicated to pure racial belligerence, and most of the other 9 are dedicated to rampant misogyny. In other words, this is for the niggas, this is for the bitches. The prelude kicks off the proceedings, bathed in the same sunny funk that had concluded 100 Miles and Runnin', indeed the album's theme music. Above the Law, among other ruthless signees and affiliates, warm up the stage for Ren to barrel through with 2 verses, driving the message home that N.W.A is as raw and uncompromising as ever. He must have been delighted to finally get to rhyme over this piano-pounding, strings illuminating, and slap bass pickled beat.
Our first record sold 2 million copies. That's because your other mother was sloppy. You came out street and crossed over, and after that your career over.
The first actual song, Real Niggas Don't Die, leaves no room to breathe. It's a reverberating xylophone and guitar riff-driven dungeon that boosts the sharp-edged rhymes of Dre, Ren, and Eazy, rhymes that bleed apathy and pessimism about a country that will always see them as second class, and thus gives them license to retaliate in any which way they wish. Whew, talk about being real bleak. And it continues to be bleak, as the previously discussed title track, riding on the interpolation of Parliament's Sir Knows Devoid of Funk, shines and torches. Then there's a skit called Protest, where a live TV broadcast of a, protest against N.W.A is dispersed by snipers, with the reporter covering the event getting shot, and paid his final respects by Dr. Dre himself. The first comparatively up-tempo track, and the album's second single, Appetite for Destruction, is next, sounded like something out of an impending violent confrontation with haunting strings, conga drums, and stabs of bass. With the Guns N' Roses inspiration, courtesy of MC Ren, all 3 MCs turn in solid performances here, keeping pace with the beat as they dare anyone to think they're frontin' on the gangsta tip. Ren especially is incredible.
Cause I'm a nigga you can't sleep on, so set the alarm, cause I hit like a mother bomb.
The end of Appetite for Destruction segues into the Don't Drink That Wine skit, the first major misfire in Niggas4Life. Gone is the ingenious incorporation of the interludes found in Straight Outta Compton and 100 Miles and Runnin'. Now, Protest could have been an integrated prelude of Appetite for Destruction, but it's ultimately good enough to stand on its own. Don't Drink That Wine, however, styled as an ad, is a failed attempt at tying irony and humor together. An a cappella group sings about avoiding alcoholic beverages in favor of weed or crack cocaine, which they falsely claim is more widely available, followed by an announcement of the ad sponsor that's a spoof of the nonprofit organization that seeks to stop people from drunk driving. It just doesn't connect. Thankfully, the album recovers with its first single, Always Into Something. After the comparatively rapid pace of the first few songs, especially Appetite for Destruction, Dre turns down the BPM for a brief respite, laying a warm, wailing sound from a Moog synthesizer that sounds like an interpolation of the overtone singing in Phase O's Riding High over a sneaking in the back drum break. If there's one direct ancestor of the strand of G-Funk that Dre would pioneer and have dominates the West Coast hip-hop sound for most of the 90s, it will be Always Into Something, which should also be remembered for this. The sporadic shots that Dre and Ren had been sending Cube's way had started with 100 Miles and Runnin' and Real Niggas off the 100 Miles and Runnin' EP. The latter reappears here, sans the integrated prelude that helps give it more context. But perhaps if the prelude had remained, it could have killed the momentum between the song itself and the skit that immediately precedes it. There is no mistaken message to BA for anything other than a direct Ice Cube diss. Once again, it's Dr. Dre. coming off as a schoolyard kid hurt that his friend no longer wants to play with him based on the missive that can be summarized as thus: "It's not you, it's me." Benedict Arnold, who was first mentioned in Real Niggas, is now more evidently Cube himself. The metaphor is appropriate, for the most part. Arnold, a Continental Army general during the American Revolutionary War, had increasingly grown dissatisfied with the level of acknowledgement of his services and eventually defected to the British side. But that's where the accuracy of the metaphor stops. Almost as soon as Arnold defected, the British paid him a paltry sum for it. The side to which he defected eventually lost, as we all know, and he died destitute and was buried without military honors from either side. Observing how Cube's career was going so far, it was virtually unlikely he was going to suffer the same sort of fate. But that wasn't going to stop N.W.A, over the album theme music, from claiming that the streets didn't like him by 1. Pointing out that Cube was not from Compton, making him the odd man out in the group, 2. Declaring him the loser to their fellow ruthless label mates above the law on 2 separate violent occasions, and 3. Dismissing him as a treacherous person willing to forsake his Southern California homeland for someplace else just to advance his own interests. And just to ensure that they were serious about their feelings about Cube.
Yeah, nigga, when we see your ass, we gon' cut your hair off and the broomstick.
Talk about an unthinkable pain in the ass. As mentioned before, Message to B.A. immediately leads into the frenetic Real Niggas, which has Dre and Ren lead, with Eazy-E in the rear, an all-out vulgarity-filled assault on their adversaries, including Cube, and which is discussed further in the 100 Miles and Running video. It's the perfect way to end the first half of Niggas for Life, a scene run by a violent, vulgarity-spewing, vice-reveling bunch. Because, after all, that's what real niggas do.
N.W.A taking over this motherfucker, y'all.
Let's describe a certain female.
In A Bitch is a Bitch, which is the B-side to Express Yourself, but was not included on Straight Outta Compton, Ice Cube addresses the use of the word bitch. It applies to women who are vain, opportunistic, fair weather, materialistic, and gossips, and are therefore worth no more than a hump and dump. But Cube adds one caveat. All women have a little bitch in them, and that caveat would be exploited by several rappers afterwards, blurring the lines between the women who deserve love and respect and those who don't. And N.W.A, with Cube gone, would be among those rappers. As outrageous as the first half of Niggas for Life is, the second one goes much further. To Kill a Hooker has Eazy-E shooting down a woman who refuses to give him and his bandmates any sexual favors. That's 3 out of 4 passable interludes so far, and all 3 should have been glued to the songs they precede. In the case of To Kill a Hooker, that song is One Less Bitch. It's like Dre's hypnotic production, a layering of the pianos of Barry White's I'm Gonna Love You Just a Little More Baby, the sustained saxophone notes of Tom Brown's Funkin' for Jamaica, and the Zimbabwe drum break from Black Heat is meant to soften the blow of extreme misogyny displayed. It's Dre and Ren disposing of any woman who is unfortunate enough to get on their bad side. In the first half, Eazy-E is not on as many songs as his group mates. But being in a half dedicated to the Bitchez, with his reputation as a sex-crazed music mogul who, at that point, was around halfway through building a starting football team of kids with almost as many women, he was now going to be in the forefront. Unsurprisingly, the 2 solo songs Eazy gets are both in the second half, Automobile and I'd Rather F You, and he doesn't even rap in either one of them. He sings. The former is him transported to some saloon in the Wild West, supported by a harpsichord player, croaking and crackling on the microphone about the pleasures of sex in a vehicle, and being upset if a woman isn't giving up the goods. And the latter, musically and thematically, is a bawdy flip of a Bootsy Collins tune, I'd Rather Be With You. Although not without their doses of humor, neither song is awfully remarkable. Ditto to Find 'em, Fuck 'em, and Flee, which has all 3 men really milking the hump and dump ideology. She Swallowed It is basically just another version of 100 Miles and Running's Just Don't Bite It, down to the subject matter, chorus, and even samples from its predecessor, but even more graphic. The song features food items such as vanilla shake to describe bodily fluids. To make matters worse, at the time, Ren was facing charges of sexual assault in the aftermath of an incident that occurred at the Alabama stop of N.W.A's Straight Outta Compton tour in July 1989. So rapping about an underage girl filleting him wasn't exactly going to win such a case for him, not to mention extremely distasteful. So the second half of Niggas for Life is nowhere as strong as its first half. The saving grace of the second half, however, is the production. By this time, Dre had entered his less is more phase. The number of samples are scaled back to give more sonic room to orally breathe, and the consequence is more sun rays bursting through and illuminating everything in sight, with Find 'em, F 'em, and Flee, and She Swallowed It being the best examples. There's only so many consecutive songs about bitches one can take, though, and so N.W.A. wisely retraced their steps to pure aggression, with mixed results. Approach to Danger replicates the reverberating danger of Appetite for Destruction, distinguishing itself with the rappers EQ'd to sound like voices coming from the other end of rotary phones. 1902 Compton is the last interlude, featuring Warren G, Dre's half-brother and who sounds awfully like Eazy, trying to get bailed out of jail. It's the least essential of the 5 skits on this album, and it symbolizes a 55-minute experience sputtering toward the end, which is The Days Are Way Back. The third and last single from the album, and only released in the UK, The Days Are Way Back, riding a dull piano-driven loop and sharing the same type of ragamuffin singing with Always Into Something, is anticlimactic. The song features Ren and Dre reminiscing about their rough early years in their shared hometown of Compton and celebrating the ability to survive it. The track, and the album, ends with a sample of On the Ill Tip, the last track from Bigger and Deffer, where LL Cool J and his homeboys laugh at their detractors for daring the budding superstar to make another album. Apropos for a group that some did not give a fighting chance in hell post Ice Cube, and still managed to force a chuckle or two for having crossed the finish line before collapsing to the ground. And when Niggas for Life made its way into stores, N.W.A. had something else to laugh about. In its first week, it debuted at number 2 on the Billboard's 200 chart. That was highly impressive for an album that was not going to yield hits, to the extent that Eazy-E had to rely on promoting it through a Republican luncheon to which he was invited. But the second week was destined to deliver a surprise. For years, record stores supplied sales figures to Billboard, a method that was prone to embellishments or outright fraud. Enter Nielsen Music, which in March 1st, 1991, introduced a system named SoundScan, through which they track actual music consumption and sales data and provide it to Billboard to determine their chart placements. So it certainly felt real and accurate when Niggas for Life, 2 months later, found itself on top of the charts the following week, displacing Spellbound by America's then pop sweetheart, Paula Abdul. It was not only the first hardcore rap record, especially during the SoundScan era, to be the #1 album in the country, but also the first independently distributed album to do so, from any genre. Perhaps to N.W.A. themselves. It was a long time coming. Ice Cube, for instance, had noted that whites comprised close to half of the total number of people at their shows during their Straight Outta Compton tour. And now the entire country, presented with the data, was facing a double reality. Not only was this oft-maligned art form getting more popular, but also its popularity was being fueled mostly by young white suburbanites. As expected, opposition rose against the sale of Niggas for Life, most notably from Minnesota's then Attorney General Hubert Skip Humphrey III, who threatened to prosecute record store chain Musicland Group, based in Minneapolis, for potentially selling the records to minors. That didn't happen because the city where Musicland was based determined that the new album didn't violate any state statutes. Besides, nothing was going to stop this train. In 3 months, Niggas for Life was certified platinum, the first sign that rap was truly going mainstream, a prelude to the genre's national and global dominance. And if not for its ban in libraries, among other places, and radio programmers having difficulty playing one suitable cut, like N.W.A. cared anyway, who knows how many more copies it could have sold. Less promising were the reviews. Niggas for Life did better within the hip-hop media. The Source, for instance, proclaimed it the album of the year for 1991 in their January 1992 edition. But the mainstream media was less flattering. Put off by the foul language, misogyny, and racial hostility, writers struggled to find one sincere moment of introspection or lyrics that were compelling. The only thing they marveled at, outside of the production, was how much cursing N.W.A managed to cram into the songs. It just seemed that Niggas4Life pushed the topical envelope further than any rap record before it, and with music so abrasive, done by a group that felt so combustible, where else was there to go? How high was the possibility that they could stay together and churn out another album? Well, for Dr. Dre, he wasn't waiting to find out. Niggas4Life, with its recording sessions quietly attended by Suge Knight, was going to be his penultimate assignment for Ruthless Records. He wrapped up work on an album with multi-instrumentalist Jimmy Z named Musical Madness. And then he checked out. N.W.A was reeling from the loss of their sonic architect, and they didn't stand a chance legally either. Outraged by the incident of duress at Galaxy Studios, Ruthless Records filed suit against Suge Knight, Dr. Dre, Sony, Death Row Records, and Solar on August 23, 1991, 4 months after the group's second album was released. Ruthless's claim? The defendants violated the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, a federal law that was initially passed in 1970 to prosecute those engaged in organized crime, such as the mafia, but eventually began to be applied more broadly. The Ruthless Records case was the first known instance of RICO being used in the music industry, with accusations of money laundering, extortion, and racketeering. The burden of proof was overwhelmingly on Ruthless, so the RICO case was eventually thrown out. And although Dre was still under contract to Ruthless, that didn't stop him from producing Deep Cover, a single for the soundtrack of a film of the same name under Solar. Released on April 9, 1992, Deep Cover was the debut of Dre's latest protege, a lanky kid who went by the stage name of Snoop Doggy Dogg, hailing from Long Beach, a coastal city in Los Angeles County about 11 miles south of Compton. Deep Cover only added to Eazy-E's outrage. But thankfully, a more peaceful resolution later in 1992 was hammered out of court, thanks to a negotiation between Ruthless and Death Row with their respective armies of attorneys in attendance. Dre was officially let go, but not without relinquishing a percentage of his publishing rights to Eazy for any work he was bound to do as a producer and rapper. Although publications had begun to report on the demise of N.W.A, and Dre was absent from most of the press runs for Niggas4Life, most people weren't aware of it until Dre's solo debut, The Chronic, arrived in December 1992, complete with disses aimed at Eazy-E. Not even Ice Cube was informed of the dissolution that started back in April 1991 as an opening salvo in his Kill at Will EP in December 1990 graduated into the anti-NWA and Jerry Heller fusillade that was No Vaseline in November 1991, a record now considered one of the greatest diss songs of all time. And that was that. With their strongest lyrical and musical foundations gone, coupled with their perceived dry well of ideas, N.W.A could not possibly continue. But the members, as solo artists, did. Ice Cube continued his string of highly acclaimed albums, and he even began to score the pop hits that eluded the group. So did Dre, not only as a producer and primary rapper with his groundbreaking Chronic album, but also on Snoop Doggy Dogg's equally fascinating Doggy Style. True to being the crucial elements of N.W.A, Cube and Dre emerged as the most accomplished alumni, helping to define not only gangsta rap in the 90s, but also hip-hop music as a whole. Eazy-E, even with a reputational hit and without top-notch songwriting and production, still maintained Ruthless afloat as one of the few black-owned independent record labels. The other two members weren't as lucky. MC Ren, who remained with Ruthless, started off well with a platinum-selling EP, but then he quickly lost momentum due to failing to keep pace with an ever-evolving rap scene and his multifaceted disgruntlement with Eazy-E. And DJ Yella, although bumped up to be more than just a DJ upon Dre's departure, found himself upstaged by the new production talent Eazy-E was recruiting. But then, just as quickly as N.W.A had flamed out, talks about resurrecting the group began in 1993. Who was going to be part of the second iteration depended on who you asked. If you asked Dre or Cube, who were never truly acrimonious toward each other, to the extent that Cube appeared on Dre's Let Me Ride music video, and both men even worked on a single together named Natural Born Killers in anticipation for a joint album, it would be everyone but Eazy. And if you asked Eazy, it would be everyone but Dre. And with Yella being mainly the DJ, who was going to be the producer?
And I'm producing this together.
Remember, it's the end of the world.
And I'm producing this.
Seems they would have gotten that covered. In any case, it was eventually going to be Dre, who, according to him, talked to Eazy on the phone early in 1995, getting both men on the path to repairing their relationship. Beating Dre to it was Ice Cube, who had reconciled with Eazy as early as 1994 and spoke with him for hours while at the Tunnel in New York in December, when the latter was in town to promote his latest acquisition, Bone Thugs and Harmony. The common denominator? Jerry Heller was on the way out. But a reunion of the classic N.W.A. lineup would never happen. In the aftermath of that New York nightclub meeting that involved Eazy and Cube in around December 1994, the former developed a cough. By March 1995, Eazy-E was dead, felled by AIDS-related complications. For a guy who had appeared to be in great health, Eazy's demise had happened so quickly that it must have shaken up the surviving members to truly patch things up and get back together. They finally got to it in 1999, by which time it was determined that Snoop Doggy Dogg, now known simply as Snoop Dogg, would be the newest member, ostensibly the ideal replacement of Eazy-E due to his more light-hearted approach to rhyming. By now, Ice Cube, becoming the main catalyst for the reunion, was a filmmaker, producing the sequel to his popular Friday comedic movie from 1995. Chin Check arrived as the lead single for the Next Friday soundtrack on August 23rd, seemingly breaking an 8-year silence. Hello followed as one of the singles of Ice Cube's War and Peace Volume 2 album, which came out on March 21st, 2000. 2 days after its release, there was an aired performance by FarmClub.com, an odd combination of a TV show, website, and record label started by Dre's friend and business partner Jimmy Iovine and then Universal Music Group CEO Doug Morris. The performance marked the first time in 11 years that Cube, Dre, and Ren shared the same stage together. Soon there was talk of a new N.W.A. album, tentatively slated for the fall of 2000, named, true to group tradition, Not These Niggas Again. But then the obvious reality of logistics set in. Conflicting schedules, long-established solo careers, the headache of trying to figure out which label would release the album. It surely wasn't the late 80s anymore. Then there were the less obvious obstacles. Snoop was never truly going to upstage the music mogul and mischief essence of Eazy-E. And the reunion didn't really feel like one. There was still the absence of the remaining original member, DJ Yella, who had, after the death of Eazy-E, retired from the music business in favor of a growing side hustle, making porn movies. And finally, there was the brutal truth. In the mid-80s to early 90s, the members of N.W.A. were developing around the same pace, each one sharpening the other to maintain an even keel for the benefit of the entire unit. But with the splintering of the group, each member was no longer bound to each other, and they consequently continued developing according to their distinctive talent and circumstances. As earlier established, Cube and Dre were already going to be the top performing alumni. But even by 2000, they were at different points in their respective music careers. Cube had been a firebrand in the early 90s, but true to the literal meaning of his stage name, he had cooled by the end of the decade. A whole new generation of fans were bound to know him more for his movie work than his music. Now done with Death Row and the head of his own Aftermath imprint with Iovine's Interscope Records as distributor, Dre was at the beginning of a second career wind. He had a hugely successful album with 2001, as well as his latest protege, Eminem, who was shaping up to become the biggest rapper in the world, just like Snoop in 93 and 94. But Dre's output had started slowing considerably in the mid-90s, and it would even get worse getting into the 2000s. As for MC Ren, who never had the career he could have enjoyed, he no longer had a record label home, having released his last album on Ruthless in 1998. The different peaks and valleys between the N.W.A. members coincided with a world that was decidedly post-gangster rap. In the wake of the murders of Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G. in a record label square-off bloated into an East Coast-West Coast war, people were tired and ready to move on. Besides, many of the elements of gangster rap had spread out throughout hip-hop music. The hedonism, the nihilism, the violence, the misogyny and homophobia, and the derogatory terms, which includes nigga. Gangster rap was still being made, but it no longer felt the same. In an age where hip-hop was now mainstream, the anti-establishment was now part of the establishment. What used to be cutting edge was now redundant, and N.W.A., based on the rather lukewarm reception of Chin Check and Hello, wasn't going to change that. If N.W.A. was dead at the beginning of the 90s, it was buried by the end of it. So, Niggas4Life will forever remain N.W.A.'s last album, just like its preceding companion piece, 100 Miles and Runnin. It's a rarely discussed record within N.W.A.'s discography and in hip-hop in general. Even for its age, it's a hard album to listen to or emotionally access, no thanks to the extreme subject matter. It remains one of the most profane LPs ever released, which is not surprising why it didn't join Straight Outta Compton in the resurgence of sales when the N.W.A. biopic stormed into theaters in 2015 to the tune of a $202 million worldwide box office. It wasn't even mentioned in the movie, buried far beneath the drawn-out dismantling of the group. And Niggas4Life would trigger or hasten the proliferation of clones, many of them known as studio gangsters, because they falsely claim that they live or have lived the misadventures they detail on wax, who did not even have a modicum of social responsibility that N.W.A. once displayed. The ugly traits of gangster rap would spread beyond the subgenre and taint the rap industry, to the point that even to this day, people associate rap with violence, particularly black-on-black crime, profanity, materialism, and misogyny. Never mind that more progressive rappers exist, because they cannot match the push, visibility, acceptance, and sales of their more profane counterparts. And it's all due to albums like Niggas4Life. After all, N.W.A. didn't call themselves the world's most dangerous group for nothing, and they are the rap act with the largest and most fruitful family tree. In the end, Niggas4Life's sordid reputation belies its actual quality. It's a brilliantly fiery send-off from probably the most important rap act in history. Niggas4Life houses, at least for N.W.A., Dre's best work that would continue to grow further into the 90s. For a group that only had one true MC out of 3, the resultant output, from a rhyming perspective, shows considerable improvement, and the album is a greater statement of social commentary, however unintended, than it's given credit for. Because it forever stands as a testament to what can happen when racial neglect and self-destructive behavior is left unchecked or rectified. It's not just an urban problem or a black problem, but an American problem. Ignoring that problem doesn't make our society any better, it just may make things worse. And that's why, ultimately, looking at how the members turned out, making it out of their working class conditions and legal troubles to live better lives, not to mention some of them becoming multi-millionaires and being major forces behind hip-hop becoming an indomitable cultural and commercial force, N.W.A. became the best niggas they could possibly be.
Wouldn't you like to be a nigga too?